Mr. Silly by Roger Hargreaves. Mr. Silly lives in Nonsense Land, which is a very funny place to live. You see, in Nonsense Land, everything is as silly as can be. In Nonsense Land, the trees are red, and the grass is blue. Isn't that silly? In Nonsense Land, dogs wear hats. And do you know how birds fly in Nonsense Land? No, they don't fly forwards, they fly backwards. It really is a silly place indeed, which of course why Mr. Silly lives here. Mr. Silly, in fact, lives in quite the silliest looking house that you've ever seen in your whole life. Have you ever seen a silly looking house like that? Now, this particular story is all about the Nonsense Cup. You see, in Nonsense Land, each year, they hold a competition, and the cup is awarded to whoever has the silliest idea of the year. Mr. Silly had never won the cup, but each night, lying in his bed, he dreamed about winning it. In order to win the Nonsense Land Cup, Mr. Silly realized that he had to think of something remarkably silly. He pondered over the problem one morning at breakfast. Incidentally, you may be interested to know what Mr. Silly was having for breakfast. He was having a cup of coffee, which he put a spoonful of marmalade into. After that, he had a cornflake sandwich, and to finish, he had a boiled egg. But being Mr. Silly, he ate the shell as well. It's not a silly breakfast. Anyway, this particular breakfast time, Mr. Silly was thinking of how to win the cup. He remembered 2 years ago the cup was won by Mr. Ridiculous. He won by wallpapering his house. It sounds very ordinary. In fact, Mr. Ridiculous had wallpapered the outside of his house. And Mr. Silly remembered when Mr. Foolish won the cup. Mr. Foolish was a friend of Mr. Silly who won the cup by inventing a car. It's quite notable part for one thing. It had square wheels. Isn't that silly? Mr. Silly thought, but it was no good. He even had another cup of coffee with marmalade, but it didn't help either. So he decided to take a walk. Off he went, leaving his front door open so that he wouldn't have burglars when he was out. On his walk, Mr. Silly met a chicken wearing Wellington boots and carrying an umbrella. Wouldn't be silly if you didn't wear Wellington boots and carry the umbrella, he said to the chicken. Meow, said the chicken, because animals in Nonsense don't make the same noises that they do in your country. On his walk, Mr. Silly met a worm wearing a top hat, monocle, and old school tie. Would it be silly if you weren't wearing a top hat, a monocle, and old school tie, he said to the worm. Quack, quack, said the worm. Then Mr. Silly met a pig wearing trousers. Would be silly if you didn't wear trousers and a bowler hat, he asked the pig. Moo, said that pig. He said that's folks want me. It was in the middle of Mr. Silly's walk that he had his idea. It's a beautifully silly idea. Quite the silliest idea he'd ever had. He hurried into town and bought himself a pair of paint and a paintbrush. The day of the great morning, the Nonsense Cup run. A huge crowd assembled in the city square to see who was going to win the cup. The king of Nonsense had invented a specially built platform. Ladies and gentlemen, he said the crowd in the city square, it is my pleasure to award the Nonsense Club who had the silliest idea of the year. What is the silliest idea of the year, continued the king, is by Mr. Muddle the farmer. He has managed to grow, of all things, a think a square apple. The crowd applauded is the square as held by Mr. Muddle for everyone else to see. He felt sure that he was going to win. However, we have, said the king, and Mr. Fuddles, we have had an infant soul entered by Mrs. Nincompoop. It was a teapot. Quite the silliest teapot there has been. The crowd broke into thunderous applause. I therefore have great pleasure, and as the king, in presenting the Nonsense Cup too. What? Just said He looked up and stopped in astonishment. Now in the middle square, there was the tree. It always been there. This is a tree. The king was looking there, so shit. What? He cried himself into the tree. It returned to like the tree of green leaves, bright green leaves. Now, not trees like all the trees in Silly, but green. There was an amazed silence. It was me, piped up, Mr. Silly. I pointed to you. It literally sounded like green last night when you're all asleep. A green tree? Exclaimed the king. Whoever heard of a green tree? A green tree sounded the crowd how silly, and they started to applaud. Mr. Silly modestly. The king held up his hands. I think, he said, that is the silliest deal that I have ever heard of. And therefore I award the nonsense cup to Mr. What do you say his name again? Oh, alright. To Mr. Silly. The crowd cheered and cheered. Mr. Silly went pink with pride. And a bird perched high in the branches of the silly green tree looked down. Woof, it said, and then it flew off backwards. No boy, that powerful pussycat. Never mind some ridiculous Mr. Tickle has of course Coke. Coke. Rest in peace. Why did I die? Think it's some egads. I like why I'm dating the weebest of wood. This is not stubby people. Teufel. Oh, some Teufel is that? Hey, you're so cool. Folk. Get my folks, I need you. Oh, some cold. No. Craziness of all happens to pigs. Ooh, you